So Mary, tell me a little bit, because I don't know the whole deal. Tell us a little bit about your story. I know you've experimented with this diet, and you've been obviously, well, there's a lot of things we can talk about, but let's just talk about your background a little bit.
Okay, sure. So I started out young in the sciences. Most of my family were in the sciences. In fact, my dad was in the Air Force, like yourself. He was a physicist, and so I was studying in the Bahamas when I was young at a field station with marine biology, and got terribly ill. And I had been really healthy. I was a triathlete. I was training for Ironman. I played 5 sports. I was like the normal healthy kid from a healthy family. But like so many people on your Meet RX site, everything went downhill, and it went down fast. And I was really quite disabled for 12 years, like breathing machine, organ damage, all sorts of things. And Western medicine really couldn't solve it. And that was a bit of a pickle, growing up in Ohio, where at least at the time, it may be very different now, but at the time it was very Western medicine based, and that was all we knew. And so that's what we did. And we already ate healthier than anyone I knew. So I didn't think it was my diet that was playing in. Anyway, at around year 7, I became fully bedbound, and my dad's a logical man. And he was like, well, this isn't working. We've sent you to the best of the best. This isn't working. We need to start looking in other ways. And so my mom went to a bookstore and bought all these books. And now I think people do this immediately, which is why I'm so grateful for your website. You can Google these kind of things, but the internet was barely around when I was going through this. So she went and got these books, and we started reading all these books by doctors who had cured themselves of impossible conditions. And the condition that I had many, but the main one was a severe case of dysautonomia, which was damaged by a microbe in my hypothalamus, or created by. And there weren't any medical cases of remissions or people getting better. So we just read books on everything. So everything from heart disease to depression to neuropathy, you name it. And then we would just try it and do it kind of scientifically, give it 3 months, 6 months, depending on if it was for the hormonal system or the nervous system, and try to do little N1 experiments. And it was actually really fun. It gave me a purpose when I was bedbound, and it was a wonderful thing. Anyway, I did end up getting better after doing a Russian diet that is a gut microbiome diet that's very heavily meat-based. And before that, I had been vegetarian and vegan, not growing up, but for my 18 to 24 adult life. So, and that's when I got the worst, right? Which I think is a common pattern for many of us. Anyway, so I did this Russian diet based on soups. I'm even having some right now. This is some pork broth I'm drinking at the moment. And I just ate soups. And so it was a meat ketogenic based diet with 2 vegetables, very small portions. And I actually went into remission. My neuropathy, kidney disease, liver disease, everything fully reversed. And it wasn't super fast, but it reversed. And so after that, I went back to school for nutrition, and really thinking at the time I would just have it as a bit of a hobby because I enjoyed it so much. And I wanted an outlet for all the things that I had learned that were so opposite from what we tend to learn. But luckily enough, I had a full practice within 3 months, and I've been on a wait list for 10 years now. So it's been really good, and I've been able to make it remote and travel. I really love to travel. And so I've been trying to travel as much as possible and kind of follow in many of the footsteps of Weston A. Price and some of these researchers before, because they were very motivational for me. They really fully changed how I looked at food, and got me eating meat again, thank goodness. And because of that, I really want to see it for myself. So I spent 6 months in Africa this year, and then I'm in Greece right now. I technically have residency here, but I'm hoping to do all the blue zones. I just released an Icarian video today on YouTube. So that was like my experience there and how different it is in reality than what people think the people in the Mediterranean are eating. But I have video footage from my last several years from traveling, and I'm going to put that in little snippets just for the public, for people to see what it's really like, what people are really eating, and how traditional societies are really in quite perfect health on their traditional foods, not getting cavities, not getting heart disease, any of these. They don't even get malaria, honestly, in my experience from all the ones I've met. So, and the difference between that and when they adopt the corn and the modern foods is quite drastic. So that's what I've been doing.
That's fascinating. I want to, because you talk about this dysautonomia, where you have the autonomic nervous system presumably not, not working well. And, when we look at the gut, I mean, the gut is this huge, we call it the splanchnic nervous system. And it's got, the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system is hugely expressed in the gut. And so there's clearly a relationship in what we eat and how that affects the gut. And so that's something that I think is quite, it makes sense to me that you would have, had problems because of that. And now you've resolved it. I mean, for someone who's been bedbound, goodness, you're full of life and you can just see a smile on your face and you're out there running around the world and quite honestly living a life that I think many people would quite be very happy with if they could do that. So let's, so Icaria was one of the 5 supposed blue zones that was listed, by Dan Buttner in his book that a lot of people have referenced as, this is how we're supposed to eat because these people live a long time. And then there's been a lot of refutation of his work. And, there was a study saying that, there's a lot of issues with record keeping and accounting and how old these people eat. But so you're in, Icaria. I guess, is that an island? Is that one of the islands? I think it's one of the islands off of Greece, if I'm not mistaken. And so what's going on there? And then let's talk about Africa a little bit. But let's talk about Greece. Great. So are they eating 95% of their diet? Is it leaves and soybeans and legumes?
No,
is that
it's
what they're
actually
doing?
completely the opposite. That's why it's so this is why I had to do it because I fell for that whole vegetarian thing. And I think so many people do. And it's not actually accurate. So I've lived in Greece on and off for the last few years while I've been traveling around. It's been my base. And so I've really traveled extensively through Greece, and the diet's very different whether you're in a mountain town versus a coastal town. For instance, you go 5 miles and you won't have something from the other region. So if you go from the coast 5 miles up the mountain, you're only going to get meat now, and it's going to be goat and lamb and wild pork. And you're going to get a lot of dairy and really wonderful butter, some of the best butter I've ever eaten. But at the coast, you're going to have the option of some of the meats like the pork because the wild pigs come down to the coast, and then you're going to have the fish. So it's still very regional. And because of all of my experience in Greece, when I keep seeing all these things about the blue zones, and I just couldn't believe that was true with what I've seen from the Greek diet so far. So I made it a mission when we got back from Africa to head over to Icaria for several weeks over this last summer. So it was actually almost 2 months, but we were there and I went throughout the island. It's a tiny island. In fact, it was just hit by a huge earthquake earlier this week. And it's right off the coast of Turkey. So it's really like getting on the way to Turkey. But they're an interesting island because they're very different than the Greeks. They're very communist. And because of that, they're not as open. The Greeks are like very open and welcoming and like, hello, and flirty and all these things. And this island, they're more skeptical of people coming in. So they don't like the cameras and the videos and all those things quite as much. Not across the board, but I would say some. Anyway, it's interesting because I really looked at a lot of these studies, and I even got to meet some of the people who put these studies together on the blue zones. And I think some of the inaccuracies came from the language barrier. I think some of them came from the fact that, and I don't know if you've noticed this too, Shawn, but I find so often when people are doing dietary studies, they've never really studied nutrition. And when you haven't really spent your life, even if it's just a study in working with patients, it doesn't have to be a formal, but just seeing how food responds in people's bodies, they miss the mark in a lot of areas. And when I was looking at these studies, they didn't ask the Icarians the correct questions. So the questionnaire only had a few different foods on it. It had olive oil, it had grains, and they separated that from pasta for some reason. And then they had fruits, vegetables, they separated potatoes from vegetables, and they had beef. And what's interesting about that is that the Icarians really don't eat much beef, but it's not a lifestyle choice. It's that they eat everything very locally. You're not going to get a pineapple or a banana in Icaria. They grow everything themselves. And I mean that very literally. It's not like they're going to farmers markets. Like they grow their own food on their own property for their family. So they have their goats and their sheep and their chickens, and they have their vegetable plot and this kind of thing. And And so they really weren't asking them the correct questions. They didn't ask them about how much lamb they ate or how much goat or chicken or dairy. They didn't have any of those on the questionnaire. So I think they just missed the mark with that and got a false impression. But to give you an idea of what it's like, on my first day, we went to a little restaurant. Now, I know Greece is mostly known for its tourism and these like beautiful sailboats and the islands and things like that. And Ikaria is definitely beautiful, but it's not a tourism island. It's not where foreigners tend to go. It's very Greek. So there's not like an industry for it. And so when you go to a restaurant, it's just for the locals, really. And it's usually some old grandma cooking up a stew. And that was very much our experience. It was very nose to tail. When I was invited into the kitchens, they would be making cheese. They would be cutting up liver and tongue and boiling a pig head and these kind of things. And I was even there in the summer, which is the height of their plant eating. Right? Because again, they're really not processing things for the winter. I want to stress that so much. So although the Icarians, and I guess I should say this too, because I don't know the background of your followers to this extent, but or how much food history you guys know, but the nightshades, the tomatoes, the potatoes, all of these things are very new to the Greeks. We think of the Greek salad as tomato and cucumber. It's only been a part of their diet for the last 100 years, and potatoes only the last 50 in Icaria. So although they eat these foods now, they still only eat them very seasonally. So they'll have them, right, like when I was there, they'll have the tomatoes and they'll cook them into a sauce or do something else with them. But they're not going to make it into a sauce to keep for winter and to have with pasta or something like that. That just doesn't get done. So, and it's actually a very low grain culture. They don't eat much grain at all. So overall, it was just completely opposite of what the book said. It's not plant, and I went in the highest plant season, but it's very much not plant-based. And even Dan, the author of the book, mentioned in there that their diet is 50% fat from olive oil. And that was without taking into account the dairy and the meat consumption and the fish consumption. But if you actually speak to a real Icarian, they'll tell you they eat goat every day. So, yeah.
How is it possible that they failed to ask about dairy and lamb and goat consumption? I just don't, that boggles my mind that would be something they would not have asked. Me too. Is that survey available somewhere where you can see the survey and see what? I
have it. Yeah. No, I can send it to you.
Yeah.
So my initial thought was that it was a language barrier because the Greek language has so many more words than the English language. And so if you say meat to a Greek, they assume that's beef. And that's all that means. So if you were to go to a Greek party and you say, oh, I don't eat meat, they'll serve you lamb or goat or chicken, not realizing, right? They don't associate that with vegetarianism. And so what it said on there was red meat and nothing else. And so they wouldn't have put the lamb, the goat, the chicken with the red meat. But I am surprised that they didn't have chicken separate. And I'm also surprised that they didn't have dairy separate. Like I said, I initially thought this was a language barrier, but there are some Greek people on the study. They're very Greek names anyway. So I honestly don't know, Sean, how they got that so wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's fascinating. Let me ask you about, so you were in Africa for 6 months. What parts of Africa were you in?
Well, only Zimbabwe, simply because of the lockdown. So I was supposed to go to 10 different countries. We were going to after Zimbabwe, we were going to Mozambique and then the Seychelles and Ethiopia and Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda, basically all over sub-Saharan Africa. And that's starting again in January, as long as COVID allows us to do so. But yeah, I was going down to really do more of this dietary research then, with the idea that then I would go on and do the rest of the blue zones. Go back to Japan and film Okinawa and those kind of things.
So, and I've been down to Africa a number of times. In Tanzania, I've got to climb Mount Kilimanjaro and did the Serengeti, and then I've been down to South Africa many times. My mother was from there originally, so.
Really, that's so great.
Yeah, very different culture, obviously. So now you said go back to Japan. So you've been to Japan, is that correct? Have you been to Okinawa and stuff like that at some
I
point?
haven't been to Okinawa, but I've been to mainland Japan,
Hmm.
and I really loved it. It's actually, there's some really good places to go if you're carnivore. I would say Greece is one because the meat is so good and it's everywhere. Japan is another. We really just ate meats and fish when we were in Japan, and it's really easy to do because there's all the yakitori restaurants and all those kinds of things. Plus, the oyster there is amazing if you do seafood. So yeah, I want to go back up and go up to Okinawa.
Yeah, I haven't. No, obviously, I think most people are aware that Japan's a good place for seafood. I wasn't aware that oysters being a big one there, but that's interesting to learn. And then, we've seen, gosh, since not sure when it is, they started increasing beef consumption or meat consumption in Japan. I think one of the emperors, and I can't remember the exact timing of this, I think it was probably around the turn of the 20th century, they were having a very difficult time getting people for their military because they couldn't meet the height requirement. And I think it was 4'11" was the minimum height required to be in the military as a male. And they were struggling to get people to do that because they were on a largely vegetarian based diet back, 150 years ago or whatever it was. And then they started to consciously bring more meat into the diet just to increase the robustness of the population. And now in the last, I think, 20, 30 years, the meat consumption in Japan has gone up tremendously from where they were. And they continue to see, as you know, long life in Japan is heralded as a place for longevity. And even though the meat consumption is going up, so interesting to see.
That's very interesting, Sean. I want to interject something because I work for Captain Soup. I make their recipes and things, and they're just this ketogenic soup company. But it's run by Brian, who teaches at West Point, and he was a captain when he started. He's now higher in the military. But it's interesting because we're putting a study together for the same reason that's going on in the States, that we're not making the recruitments. Not because of a lack of desire for people to join the military, but because they're not healthy enough. They're not meeting the weight requirements and these kind of things. So we're actually seeing that same problem here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The U.S. military, they've lamented, this has been going about a decade. They've been lamenting the fact that the number of eligible recruits for the military is becoming incredibly small because there's so many, and it's the opposite problem. It's not being too short, it's being too fat. That's the problem we're running into. We got so many people that can't make the minimum requirements. And, I was in the military and I didn't think it was hard at all. I mean, it was quite easy actually to make it through the sort of basic training type of stuff. But I came from a background as an athlete, so I didn't have any issues with that. But yeah, that is a serious issue, and it's reflected of the general population as a whole. We can't even defend our country because,
Isn't that terrifying?
Yeah, it is. It is. We can't even find the people to help defend our country if we were to need to do so because there's so many people are sick from likely lifestyle and dietary factors. And it's, no matter, we talk about, we're obviously in a big political craziness here in the U.S. right now. And regardless of who you support, I mean, we can't thrive as a nation with an unhealthy population. I mean, it's just, regardless of what your fiscal or policy beliefs are on government form, if you don't have health, it's like anything else. I mean, health is wealth, and I think it goes from an individual level to a population level. Let's talk about so some of the other things you've observed, because you've been, I mean, I know you were in France. I saw you. What's the little the bacillus, not the bacillus, the little Sacré-Cœur de Montmont, or what is it, Montmont or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm probably butchering the pronunciation on that, but I was there. I went up there and climbed up the steps and looked around. It was nice, overlooking Paris, and it was a little foggy the day I was there, so I couldn't see as much. But what are you seeing around the world as far as diet and lifestyle and health in different parts? Because we have a very skewed perspective here in the United States and in the Western part. What are some of these other sort of places we're not so familiar with look like?
Well, I think France is really interesting because I'm pretty svelte, and I think you actually can't gain weight. You can't even be chubby in France and get around. And I mean that quite literally because getting on the tube there, they have these entrances that are like this wide and you have to fit in those with your bags in order to get through. So I think some cultures like the Japanese and the French, they keep people thin by mandate almost. Like if you start to eat too much, you're going to have to do something. But you know what surprised me the most, Shawn, with traveling was how much a lot of the traditional cultures that we've heralded as very healthy or we've heralded for their longevity, they tend to eat very simply. So like the French, we think of as this gourmet culture, but it's really not. It's usually like meat in a starch or meat in broth or fish, like fish soup, these kind of things, or cheese with bread. And when they do the starches, they do the proper 3-day ferment that removes the lectin, at least down to 12 particles per million, which isn't much. And I found that to be the same with Japan. I was wondering, so I'm not allergic to anything, and now I'm very lucky. I've been in full remission now for almost a decade, and I can really eat whatever I want, but I really eat mostly what I ate, with what I healed, because it's become a habit and I like it, and I don't get colds and flus and all these kinds of things. I don't need to speak to the chorus here. There's a lot of reasons to stay on. But for that reason, I didn't know what Japan was going to be like. Like, am I just going to be eating a lot of sashimi or what? And I was actually almost meated out by the time I left Japan, which really surprised me. I wouldn't have expected that. It was mostly like meat or fish and then a little bit of rice, and it wasn't a large portion. In Greece, I would say they're coming by the wayside of America. Their health is starting to go down as well. But they're getting bigger waistlines and these kind of things. They're not looking as healthy. They still look a lot healthier than, I would say, Northern Africa. Egypt, I would say, looked the least healthy of all the places I've been. And I really wonder if it's from the lack of sunlight, partially, because they fully cover themselves up, and then they're shaded by buildings, and they tend to only go out at night and early morning. So they have this kind of diurnal schedule, kind of like the deer do. And they just look very, very unhealthy. I didn't see anyone with clear eyes or healthy teeth or healthy weight or healthy skin, that kind of thing. And I thought it had to be more than just diet in that situation. But if you go down to like Zimbabwe, which it sounds like you're familiar with, which is really great, it's interesting because they have great teeth, but they have definitely adopted the corn, which wasn't native, right? So corn came with the colonization, basically, and has become really common, but they don't process it in the way to release the niacin and the really important things that are necessary if you're going to be healthy on corn or maintain your health on corn. So you're starting to see, I could see cases of pellagra and things like that, deficiency diseases when I went down the street. It wasn't common. It wasn't every person, but it would definitely be every day that you would see these kinds of things. And that sort of thing. But their weight has been pretty good still. I think it's going to get much worse because what I was seeing in the shopping carts was mostly canola oil and maize. That was the main thing. They are a heavy meat culture in Zimbabwe. You don't ever have a meal without meat. But I think the influx of the vegetable oil industry and the corn is really impacting them. They still have the billboards like we did, and maybe we still do in America, I'm not sure. But back in the 80s and 90s, where it was like, eat for your heart, margarine kind of thing. So, so that, that's still kind of the regular dialogue there, I would say. But overall, people eat much healthier in Zimbabwe. Most people have their own, they have great meat, some of the best steak I've ever eaten. Honestly, we eat steak every day, and they tend to grow their own vegetables and that kind of thing. So outside of the corn and the vegetable oil, they're not relying on outside markets for their food, which I think has saved them quite a bit, but we'll see how that affects them generationally. I really find, I don't know if you've seen this, but I really see the generational impact of the modern diets more than anything else.
Yeah, I think a couple of points, you bring up, I know we hear people talking about rice featuring so heavily in Asian diets. And while that is, their sort of grain of choice, rather, whereas, America is more of a wheat or corn-based diet, it is not eaten in huge quantities. In fact, there's been a couple studies now looking at people that eat lots of rice in those areas, and they do have higher rates of diabetes and obesity. I mean, so there is a sort of correlation that rice is a small complement. When I was in Tanzania, I remember I was staying, some hosts allowed us to stay at their house very graciously. And, you know, every meal was pretty much the same. It was some meat, it was a little bit of rice, and I think there were some vegetables in that. And that was kind of their daily, everyday staple. I mean, it was, you know, it was, you're always going to get some sort of meat, whether it was, you know, some kind of antelope animal or chicken or, you know, just depended, you know, and I think that's, you know, very much part of the culture there. Interesting about Egypt, you know, and we see across the Middle Eastern region in general, I'll include Northern Africa in there, you know, Egypt being part of that, is we are seeing significant issues with obesity and insulin resistance and diabetes. It's exploding. Whether it's sunlight or not, hard to say. Obviously, that's a part of the world where there's a lot of sun. Obviously, Egypt, you're not, it's not like there's lack of opportunity for sun, but, you know, if the culture is you're covered all the time, maybe that, I'm sure that has something to do with it. So interesting. What other places can we talk about?
Well, I'll tell you, with Japan, there's an interesting thing about Japanese history. Rice actually wasn't common. It was taro. Taro was their starch. But I think, you know, when I've looked at foods historically, usually the starches are survivalist food, right? So if we look at, let's take oatmeal. Oatmeal really wasn't eaten by humans except in punishment circumstances. So it was usually for the horses. And then there were cases of, you know, like Jewish slaves in kind of Roman times being fed the oats as a punishment. But it was never a healthy food until really the Quakers made it that way, and just with a stamp of this is healthy, and so there you go. But I think the Russian diet is really interesting. I like studying diets in places where the environment is very harsh, because I think that really lets us know what we need to survive, and I think that's why the Maasai are so interesting as well, right? I don't know about you, but I like to thrive more than just survive. But I think these diets really allow you to do just that. And I think the reliance on starch on certain cultures we got away with that because our microbiomes were healthier and we didn't have as many onslaughts. But today I see starch as a huge issue. An unintentional issue, but I think it's an issue. So yeah, I like the traditional Russian diets. I like how much they ferment. Like today I ate some fermented salmon and it was just amazing. I love eating fermented salmon. That's very Russian. They always did lots and lots of ferments with their meats and things like that, or with their vegetables, and lots of dairy products. I know not everyone can do those, but I'm lucky in that way. So, so I like that. And I think the Maasai are really interesting as well, because there's tribes right next to them. You know, there's about 27 different tribes right next to the Maasai, but the Maasai were always the warriors. They were the ones who won everything. In fact, the Hadza that have been so much in the news for the last few years, from people going to visit and everyone's proclamations about their health, they always hid from the Maasai. In fact, they have homes under the earth to hide from the Maasai because the Maasai were so much stronger than them. And really, the Hadza eat enormous amounts of meat as well, in that they tend to eat it daily. But yeah, I like doing the comparison ones. I would say I want to go see who I want to go see next is the Pygmies. I want to go see the Pygmies. They, from what I understand, I have some really good connections with them, and they have they go and do hunting on a daily basis, and it seems very easy. I always find it interesting how people, when they're talking about maybe the past or current hunter-gatherers, how it's so hard to find meat. And if you think about it, it's actually quite easy. I know I used to live in Oregon before I started traveling so much, and I had this beautiful mountain home, and we had hundreds of turkeys in the neighborhood and deer and all these things, and that feeds you for quite some time. And that's definitely been my experience studying with tribes, is that they are not short on food in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's interesting. And when you look at the different, you know, the Maasai being a number of these sort of Nilotic tribes that live along, you know, the Nile Basin or the Nile area, you know, we have the ones that sort of adapt a relationship with cattle, you know, become pastoral Cattle tend to be very tall, very athletic. You know, I mean, they're just physically imposing. And like you said, these warrior cultures. And I've seen there's been contrast between these different tribes, and ones that do tend to be less hunters and more gatherers, and they tend to be smaller, more diminutive. They have more dental issues, so on and so forth, you know. And it's a very nice contrast, because they're living basically in the same part of the world, and yet they're electing a different dietary situation. And it does become the difference between thriving and surviving. And, you know, a lot of us, you know, obviously humans can eat plant-based foods. We do. We've been doing it for, you know, tens of thousands of years, arguably maybe longer. But again, when it comes to thriving, I think, you know, it's pretty clear that the real nutrition is coming from, you know, animal source foods, whether it's meat.
I totally agree. Plus, I think we know most of the fat soluble vitamins that we actually require, that are so necessary for pregnancy, fertility, healthy immune systems, healthy brains, like the DHA and all of that, the K2 and the animal form of A, those only come from animal foods. They don't come from the plant world. I guess there's an exception with K. You can get it from natto, but it's pretty rare. That's not everywhere in the world. Yeah, I think it's exceedingly important. I think the plants are really interesting. I just taught this class last week. I was teaching to the GAPS diet practitioners. And for those of you that you don't know, the GAPS diet, it stands for gut and psychology, or gut and physiology syndrome. It's about a 50-year-old diet created by a Russian physician who also has a master's in nutrition. And she had a son with autism. And that was the diet that cured my dysautonomia and all my other maladies as well, thyroid disease, all that kind of stuff. But there's many, many different versions of this diet. And one of the most common versions to use is a carnivore version of the diet. It's actually where I learned about the carnivore diet. So I started practicing with it about 10 years ago and used it with my schizophrenic clients and that kind of thing. But that's where I learned it was from the GAPS community. And it's interesting you bring up the plants, because plants have a defense system. And this is what I was teaching the class on to all these practitioners last week, was on these defense systems that the plants have. So, you know, we can run from an invader, or a horse can run from us, right? A cow can run from us, but plants can't run. And so they have these defense systems, and each of them have different defense systems. So for instance, I think the acacia is a perfect example in Africa, the acacia and the giraffe. It's really an adorable dance that you can watch if you ever go, because the giraffe will start munching on the acacia, and the acacia will panic and produce all of these tannins and send off gas through the air to warn the other acacias upwind that there are giraffes in the area. And so all of those acacias within about 100 meters will also produce this tannin. And in dire situations, they'll actually recruit ants to come, and they'll also send out little messages through the mycelium under the earth to the other acacia as well. And so they get that bitter taste in the leaves, the giraffes stop eating, and the giraffes know to walk about a mile and then start munching again. But that's not unique to human foods. Human foods do that as well. In fact, a lot of them, whether we're talking about oxalates or lectins or solanines, which I think are some of the most insidious, because those in combination cause a lot of issues with the other ones, or salicylates or any of these kind of things. They really are plant defense mechanisms. And many of them, their only purpose is to defend the plant. It's not that they have multiple purposes, right? So if you take like a lectin, and they're good or bad, they're good and bad lectins. So you guys will see a lot of worrying online about if lectins are good or bad, but I think that's because there are both good and bad lectins in the world. But the bad lectins are classified scientifically as toxins for all mammals, and they're small toxins, but they bioaccumulate. And if you're eating solanines at the same time, they really lodge into the tissue, so it's more problematic. But yeah, I think a lot of these are a huge issue, and one of the reasons why I think so many people are getting more and more sick is because the public does not know about these plant toxins. And in traditional societies, they either ate seasonally or they didn't eat them at all. And so they didn't get into these same issues, with a few exceptions. The Greeks were actually an exception. They used to have a surgery to remove oxalate stones before anesthetics. And that's a real nasty surgery. So they definitely were getting oxalate stones back in the day. But it's not surprising because they love that horta, the sauteed greens so much. And that's a really high oxalate food. And we have a long growing season here. So you could really stock up on those oxalates longer than other places. So yeah, I think the plant toxins are absolutely fascinating. And the more I learn about them, the more insidious I think they actually are. And I think it would be good for the public to know more about them.
Yeah, there's been several of us talking about that now for a while, and there's obviously pushback because they're like, well, it's in vegetables, so it must be healthy, and like solanines. I think generally I think potatoes are where they're expressed commonly, particularly green. If you get potatoes that aren't quite ripe, they're very high in solanine. If I'm not mistaken, I haven't looked at solanines in a while,
That's
but
correct.
it's interesting that with the and this is something that's clearly out there, that the plants do have a communication system. They emit chemicals that other plants respond to. We see that with, just ripening of fruit with ethylene. You can put fruit in that's ripening near other fruit, and the other fruit will start to ripen. That's because of ethylene gas that is transmitted through the air. And so these plants do actually have a communication system. And so there is, whether you want to call that intelligence or not, that's debatable. Some people will say it doesn't have a central nervous system, therefore it can't communicate, and there's no intelligence going on. But surely it's going on in the relationship between the giraffe and the acacia. It's pretty interesting because that's pretty much what they live on. Giraffes are, they're restricted areas where they have access to that for the most part, at least in nature. I don't know what you feed a giraffe in the zoo. Maybe they have different things they can tolerate, but that is kind of their natural diet. And so it's fascinating to see that. The plant issues, this is a thing, and I think I like your point about, is it the modern diet that has further compromised our capacity to deal with those things? Because, some people are saying, look, there's people that have been eating whatever, some sort of fruits and vegetables for a long time, and they're not having these issues that so many other people we have with autoimmune issues and, the whole bunch of things, whether it's mental health disease, gut disturbances, and maybe there's this overall environment that just predisposes us for further damage from oxalates, salicylates, glycoalkaloids, tannins, the list goes on and on. There are literally thousands of these compounds. And the other thing I'd say, you correctly point out some of the fat soluble vitamins that are found in, animal products, but there are many compounds unique to animal products that we can sort of make some of them to some degree, but it may not be the optimal amounts. I'm talking about things like creatine, taurine, carnosine, carnitine, so on and so forth. And these may become conditionally essential depending upon what's going on in your life. And so if you're not including them in your diet, and those compounds I just listed are almost exclusive to animal products, you may see issues. We see that where there was a study 2018 looking at major depressive disorder, and they saw that circulating levels of carnitine are extremely low in people with chronic major depressive disorder. We know that people that are on plant-based diets generally have low levels of carnitine, even though you can make some. So, we see that, hey, maybe, and that's why a lot of us feel better. Our moods get better, perhaps. Maybe one of the mechanisms why our moods get better when we include more meat-based stuff in our diet.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I used to specialize in mental health. I really now work with all different kinds of conditions, but I used to, for a long part of my career, I really specialized in mental health and schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, those kind of things. And the change in people is really remarkable when you take out the carbohydrates, you give them tons of saturated fat and tons of protein. I think because you need those amino acids, right? Those amino acids are the building blocks for a lot of our feel-good chemicals. Our feel-good chemicals really require a bit of cholesterol and your bacteria to work with them as well, and those kind of things. And then, of course, it brings down the inflammation that you have in the brain as well. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think my family lineage is French, and so everything in moderation and lots of that kind of thing. And my family's really healthy on that old, more traditional diet and that kind of thing. And what I've seen was I was also just as healthy until I had all the antibiotics. So I really think if you're really doing a diet in the traditional way and you're rotating by season and you're not eating foods maybe from the New World that have been imported, I think the New World foods are highly problematic because they have to be processed in very specific ways. And I'm talking about plant matter there. I think you can be quite healthy. Obviously, I think history has shown that. But whether or not we tolerate a toxin or thrive on a toxin is a conversation that I think needs to be had. And I think a lot of those foods that have been traditional have been survivalist foods as opposed to thriving foods. And I think in many parts of the world, you can really see the difference. The Maasai and some of the Russian tribes being perfect examples. There's some down in the Amazon as well. But clearly we thrive on animal products. That's definitely what I've found. And I think the plant products can be used in certain situations, but they're problematic because they come with quite a bit of toxins along with them.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point you bring up. Most of us think about amino acids and building muscle, but they are also critical for some of these neurotransmitters and other things that run our brain and our physiology in general. So it's not just building muscle. It has to do, you're right, it has to do with some of these hormones that make us feel good. You mentioned, I want to bring back, you mentioned taro as a original staple of the Japanese. And, if we look at sort of human expansion across the globe, I think it's generally accepted that, from Asia went to Pacific Islands, and taro has been a significant component of the Pacific Island food. We look at like native Hawaiians. I think the taro plant was something that's utilized quite a bit in there. I don't know if it's called poi or something along those lines.
Poi, that's right.
Yeah, poi.
It's a staple.
So the interesting thing that I saw, and there was an interesting, I got into some of the radioisotope data, Michael Richards from Max Planck University, looking at early humans and Neanderthal and showing that they ate largely a carnivorous or meat-based diet. But he did some studies on Pacific Islanders, which are obviously newer people because the Pacific Islands weren't inhabited until several hundred years, maybe 800 years ago. I mean, there's one of the latest places on the planet to become inhabited. And looking at their diet and their isotopic diet is, even though they lived on an island, it looked like the majority of their food was coming from pigs and, obviously some of the coconut and stuff like that. But interestingly, they were, I guess, feeding the pigs fish, based on the isotopic data. Is it like even though they're surrounded by fish, they elected to eat pig. And they said they would use the fish as a food supplement to feed the pigs, to fatten the pigs up, I guess. And eat the pigs. So I thought that was kind of quite interesting. I don't know if
That's
you've done
amazing. I would love to see the fatty acid profile of those pigs.
Yeah,
that would be so interesting. Yeah, no, and that's very true about the pork on the islands. It tends to be very, very heavily eaten on all the islands, the Greek islands, whether you're in the Hawaiians, the Southeast Asia, all of them. Pork is a big food, and I think it was a needed food, honestly. So we talked a little bit about dysautonomia earlier, but dysautonomia is pretty uncommon. It's becoming more common now, I would say, but until 1990 in medical literature in the States, you didn't see it too much. Now you're seeing it pretty often. But it was actually a traditional historical condition throughout all of Japan. There were many, many cases of it back in medical doctrines because it presents with beriberi. So if you get a deficiency in B1, you get dysautonomia, and that was a thing that would happen in the upper classes of the Japanese, and they knew about that. And you would be especially prone to that if you didn't eat pork, because pork is one of the best sources of B1. There's actually not a lot of great sources of it. It's not so much in the fatty, it's in the meat, it's in the muscle where you get more of the B1. But you'll notice that throughout the cultures that tended to have rice with their diets, they also had pork or one of the other B1 prevalent items.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. The beriberi, which is the B1 or thiamine deficiency, and it can manifest with cardiac or neurologic, depending on if it's wet or dry beriberi. But there was interestingly, pork is the number one consumed meat in the world on a worldwide basis, just because of the huge consumption that occurs in Asia. But interestingly, if you go back to I think early part of the 20th century, they were looking at research on beriberi because we were seeing a lot of problems with that with rice eaters. That was a big problem with thiamine problems. And what they saw was, and they were doing some animal studies, they saw if an animal was fed if they had low thiamine levels in the serum, they tended not to develop beriberi unless it was accompanied by a high carb diet. So then if they were eating a high carb rice-based diet, perhaps they would develop these symptoms of beriberi. But if they weren't taking the carbs in, even though they had low thiamine levels, they didn't develop the beriberi. So when we see that repeated with the Inuit, when looking at vitamin D levels and rickets, the Inuits eating the traditional meat-based diet, even though they had low vitamin D levels, did not develop rickets. However, if you added flour, sugar, canned goods to their diet, they did develop rickets with the same serum levels of vitamin D. So it's not only the level in our blood, but it's also what's going on and I guess what our requirements might be. And I know we see this with things like magnesium. Magnesium is a cofactor for carbohydrate metabolism. And so many people have this clinical magnesium deficiency. And I think it might be secondary to excessive carbohydrate consumption, driving that magnesium need higher than that can be met through diet naturally. So interesting about that.
I think so too. No, I think so too, because with magnesium, if you consume, let's say you consume 1 molecule of sugar, you deplete 52 molecules of magnesium, and you can't keep up with that. And on the diets we were all raised on, even if our parents were like, no sugar cereal, we were still getting so much sugar in our cereal that we were still constantly depleting that. And thiamine is also deeply involved in the ATP cycle. The ATP cycle doesn't really work without it. So if you have someone with, say, like dysautonomia or a thiamine deficiency, and you put them on a low carb diet, many of them, it will regulate it for many of them, unless it's a very deep one. And then it has to be addressed directly. But yeah, I find that fascinating all the time. And in the 10 years I've been teaching the carnivore diet, I haven't seen any deficiencies develop in anyone, which isn't surprising probably to you because you've been working with it as well. But I think when we're not depleting nutrients from what we're eating, when we're not eating the anti-nutrients and things that pull out nutrition from the body, we don't actually require the same levels. And I think it also has to do with our bacteria, right? Like with vitamin C, obviously there's vitamin C in meats and organ meats and these kind of things, but we seem to require so much more of it when we're on a carb-based diet, and then it can cause so many problems with cancer, right? Because it can protect the cancer, as all antioxidants can do from the immune system seeing it. So yeah, I think there's just a lot of double-edged swords, but I think it's wonderful that with really traditional diets like the Inuit diet, where you're eating the seal blubber and that kind of thing, that you really do quite well on so little.
Yeah, it is interesting that in hopefully we'll have more people start looking at. I was happy to see that. I think the people that run the RDA, at least I think it was 2017, where they finally recognized that zinc deficiencies start to add up with phytate concentrations. So if you eat, I think they've changed the recommendations for zinc RDA based on phytate consumption. So if you're eating a lot of phytic acid, beans, legumes, and so on and so forth, grains, for every 1,000 milligrams of phytate you eat, you're supposed to double your zinc consumption. So we're seeing this zinc depletion, which is another critical brain health nutrient. We know that zinc plays a huge role in our mental well-being. So, and among other things, sexual function, all these other things. So we see it over and over again, and it's becoming clear, more and more clear to me that this, what we're eating in addition to meat is driving up requirements, I think, pretty clearly.
I do too. Yeah, I see a lot of zinc deficiencies. I see them the most in the teenagers, I would say, and especially female teenagers, but I see them across the board. And when I was working in the mental health clinic back in the day, most of the cases of anxiety that would come in really were not situational. They were very much biochemical. They were lacking zinc, or they were lacking some of the amino acids, these kind of things, especially GABA or serotonin would present with the anxiety the most. But yeah, I see a real problem with the amount of zinc deficiencies. And you can spot them too. A lot of people that have white spots on their fingernails, it can be calcium as well, but it's very often a zinc deficiency. So if you've got that with anxiety as well, it's definitely something you should cover and eat a lot of oysters or another zinc-rich food.
So tell me a little bit, you said you kind of, I guess, partially traveling the world to learn more, and then you kind of have this, I guess, practice where you're helping people. How does that working for you? I guess it's all online, obviously, would be my assumption.
Oh yeah, I've been swamped. I've been really lucky. So I see about 60 people a week, and it's really fun. It's probably my favorite part. I love I should close my practice. I do all the time, but then it's like, it's my favorite part of the day is working with people. And I get so excited to see them get better and all those kinds of things. So the way that I do it, I put my schedule to PST and then I work my travel plans around my schedule so that it never changes for my clients. And what that's allowed me to do, and then I have this wonderful, which if any of you guys are digital nomads, you need a remarkable, these things are lifesavers. I can keep all my client files in there. So then I can schedule all of my tours and all of my classes. Like if I'm doing a cooking class or if I'm going to go film some people, I can schedule it around them. And I can also do all of my flights. And that's made my life very easy. So it's really a dream life. And I honestly, like what you said in the beginning, Shawn, and I honestly did that quite purposefully. I was sitting down many years ago and really reflecting on how lucky I was to get my life back. And it was just so unexpected to do so. And so I just kind of drew out exactly what I wanted. And I knew I wanted to see the world. I knew I wanted to help people get better. And I was already in that field, you know. And I wanted to bring them both together. So now I have this really dream life where I get to spend my whole day because of the time zone change, you know, getting up, doing my workout outside and meditation, cold therapy, journaling, all that kind of wonderful stuff that makes me feel happy and grateful to be alive. And then I can spend the day going to farmers markets or going to the fish market or going swimming or visiting people locally, you know, these kind of things, doing filming. Today I was editing all my Korean videos and some of my African videos. So it just depends on the day. And then I see clients in the evening and then I go to sleep. And so it's really, I feel so grateful to the internet because it's allowed me to do this, which has been so nice, but I am overswamped. So I've been trying to do more courses. I'm actually taking a month off. So for the low hanging fruits, all the easy conditions like diabetes and those kind of things, I'm putting those into courses. And then the tricky conditions like what I had and like Lyme disease and those things where people are really in the trenches, those I'll keep taking on, and that kind of thing is basically my plan for now anyway. But I'm really enjoying making these videos. I feel a bit like a kid with a video camera, you know, so it's been a lot of fun.
Good for you. That's wonderful. It sounds great. Let me ask, you know, we have, you know, we're in the midst of another dietary guidelines review, you know, getting ready for that to be put forth. When you travel around the world, I imagine a lot of these, I imagine there's not a dietary guidelines for Ikaria or, you know, Zimbabwe. Maybe there is, but I mean, what are you finding that the less sort of help from the powers that be, the
Yes.
government telling us to eat it, the better that people do, or do we do better when we have all these sort of guidelines from our governments?
We do so much better when we don't have the guidelines, so much. In fact, Shawn, that's a really brilliant insight of yours that I honestly hadn't thought about. But when I think about the healthiest places that I've been to, they have zero guidelines. They're just doing what their grandparents did. That's it. And they're just, they don't even think about it. No one's dieting. No one's doing any of that kind of thing because they're not having to. And the more regulation, like I think of England, there's so much regulation on the diet, and it's probably, at least visually, one of the least healthy places, right? So yeah, I think the government should probably step back from the nutritional recommendations for sure.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think humans can figure out how to eat, you know.
Yes.
It's just, you know, it's just we have so much junk available to. Somebody, as Brooke was asking, who's doing your filming? Are you filming? Do you have somebody helping you out making videos and stuff and helping you?
Oh, I do. I mean, I'm just doing this for fun, but yeah, my partner, he does all of my videography. So we just travel around and he does the camera and then I do the talking and he does the translating if we're in Greece.
So I guess you can speak Greek then. Are you learning?
Yeah, he's fluent.
Are you fluent in a few languages now? Do you have a few languages?
No, I'm terrible actually. So growing up, I studied French, Spanish, and Japanese, and now I'm learning Greek, but I'm honestly terrible at languages. So I can do conversation. That's about it. I'm working on it though. And it's my goal for this year.
For you. Well, that's fun. So you think you're going to stay in Greece for the foreseeable future? Is that the plan as your home base?
Yeah, for now. So I'm looking at buying some properties here, but honestly, I love living out of a suitcase, if I can be perfectly honest. Like I really, if the flights were open, I would be traveling right now. There's so many places I want to see and document and explore. So I definitely want a home base here. I miss LA. I used to actually go to Venice all the time. It's one of my favorite places. If I was back in the States, that's where I would buy now. But yeah, so maybe Greece. I love Greece. I have Greek residency, but I would be traveling. Like as soon as they open the doors, I'll be in Africa again.
I was going to ask you where you want to go to see next. So that would be,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of fun to that stuff. So anyway, well, I'll tell you what, Mary, we've been just about an hour here. This has been really informative, I think enjoyable. Can you come back and stop by and see us again, maybe down the road, and so we can kind of catch up on
I
next?
would love to.
Yeah, what's when you go to the next blue zone? Maybe you go to Costa Rica or Italy, Sardinia or
Perfect.
one of those places we could see. I don't think you have to go to Loma Linda. I mean, there's there's only like 7,000 people in that cohort anyway, which kind of makes me laugh. It's such a small group, and then we've got. I look at places like Hong Kong where there's 7 million people and they're living longer than anyone, and they're eating massive amounts of meat, which is kind of an interesting observation. But
I think it's a great observation. Yes.
So Mary, tell us how people can sort of track you, follow you, get some more information.
Oh, sure.
What's the social media stuff, so on, website, so on and so forth.
Sure. So my website is enableyourhealing.com, and that's where you can find everything from me. And then I just started a YouTube channel. I have tons of footage, so I'm going to be putting lots of stuff up. It's mostly just fun, travel, and diet. And then I run a couple different programs. So I'm the director of nutrition for Captain Soup, which is that ketogenic soup company. They use all traditional foods. They're really great. And then I do a Back to Joy program, which is like an online anxiety, depression reversal, and that's backtojoyprogram.com. And then I also have a ketogenic lectin-free program for autoimmunity as well. So that's kind of all the places. But I would say just Instagram, which is Mary Ruddick CNC, or my website, Enable Your Healing. One day I'll put all that together. I just never had intended this to be a business, so I haven't set up that way. I'm a bit scattered. But yeah, if you find me on either my website or my handle on Instagram, you'll get tapped in.
Well, wonderful. Sounds like it's a great life, and you're a very positive representation of what health can do, diet and lifestyle can do for one's health. So keep up the good work, and don't hesitate to come in the community anytime. You're welcome here, and we'd love to have you back on to speak again. Okay.
Thank you so much. I would love that too.
All right, guys. You guys all take care. We'll see you tomorrow. I think we had Jason Roundtree coming on tomorrow. Dr. Jason Roundtree. We're going to talk more about regenerative agriculture. You guys take care. All right. See you tomorrow, guys. Bye-bye.